childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And so we're in a constant state of competition. Good assistance, Steve. You can't make a mistake.
Welcome, everyone, to Friends of Failure. I'm your host, Sam, and this is my co-host, Megan.
Heyo.
Today, we have a special guest I'd love to introduce you to, Sandee Sgarlata. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Sam and Megan, for having me on today.
Of course.
Yeah,
And
we're
really
very
looking. I
excited to
love
have
the
you.
name, Friends of Failure. That's awesome.
Right? We get some interesting questions sometimes of like, can we explain it, right? Because I think a lot of people have the why would you want to be a friend with failure? But if you explain the perspective of it, I think it's pretty clear, right? Of we need failure to get to success, right?
Absolutely.
And I think you have to agree at least a little bit. That's why you're here today, right?
Yeah.
So I would love, if you don't mind, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So Sandee Sgarlata, I live outside of the Washington, D.C. metro area. I'm in my second marriage to the love of my life. I have two stepdaughters that are 28 and 29, and my son is 21 and is in college. And I'm looking forward to him coming home on Tuesday. Yay. For the holidays.
For the holidays.
For the
Perfect.
holidays. Yeah. So my second book, Happiness Solved, Climbing 100 Steps, was released in February 2021. And
Nice.
I also started a podcast, which is also called Happiness Solved. And my podcast is ranked number 11 out of the top 80 happiness podcasts. So I'm very excited for that.
Nice.
So yeah, my life has been not necessarily, certainly I've had my share of failures. I've also had my share of tragedy. And that's why I wrote my book, because my book is part self-improvement, part memoir, and a workbook. So everything that I talk about in the book is how I've lived my life for the past 30 years. So the book is Happiness Solved, Climbing 100 Steps. The Climbing 100 Steps is my mini memoir. There's like 4 chapters where I talk about, my experiences. And the 100 Steps comes from when I was growing up. We lived outside of Annapolis, Maryland on the Severn River. And there was 100 steps that went from the river dock up to the house. And I was also a competitive figure skater. So every time I would climb those steps, it was like the movie Rocky, and I would hear the music and, I'd be running up those stairs, and it was just a happy place for me. And it was a challenge, and there was a sense of accomplishment that went along with it. So one weekend, my parents went away for the weekend, and I was staying at a friend's house at their weekend home or whatever that was also on the Severn River. And I was called home early, and my friend's brother brought me home by boat. And so we were climbing up the stairs, and we were happy and laughing. And I wasn't really concerned about why I was called home early, only to find my father standing at the door, politely asking my friend to leave. And he told me that my older brother had tragically died while serving in the US Army. He was 19 and I was 12. It was 2 weeks before my 13th birthday. So my whole life came crumbling down. So the Happiness Solved, Climbing 100 Steps is all about me in my quest over the last 30 years of always wanting to get back to that place of peace and happiness that I felt while climbing the 100 steps. So that's the long version of where that comes from on my book.
I feel like that's actually the short version. I'm sure that story.
There's probably a lot more in that book.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot more. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear about your brother. It's interesting how there are these life-changing moments that it almost forces a certain path that we end up taking, right? And then at a certain point, we have to kind of take hold of our lives again. I think tragedy is one of the hardest ones because it's such a violent shift in perspective, right? That we just have to decide, like, how are we going to deal with it and who are we going to become because of it, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I did want to ask this question. You said your second book. So you have a first book. Is that just a totally different?
It's totally different. It was published in 2009. when I was still married to my ex-husband, and Sgarlata is his name. And since I had already published a book, I've been known as Sandee Sgarlata for 30 years. So I just, my current husband is totally okay with it.
Awesome.
That's my pen name. So yeah, my very first book is a novel for young adult. It's a young adult fiction. And
cool.
I had a contract for 5 books. It was supposed to be a series of 5. So the first one was released. It was called The Day After Tomorrow. It's not available. It's not in print any longer. The second book is called Beginning to Remember. And I finished it in 2010, and the publisher went out of business. So it's just sitting there. So my plan, because it's not complete, and I like to finish what I start, and it's just hanging over my head. So I've put the first and the second book together because they were not very long books. It was a short read, and I'm going to finish it. So I'm hoping that's my big project for 2022, is to finish that and get that back out in the world as one book. And
Awesome.
But it won I was a finalist in 2 book awards for young adult fiction, and it was great. It's a really great story that needs to get back out there. So I need to kind of make it more relevant for today's time.
Sure. I had to ask just out of curiosity because, you know, it was going to linger in the back of my mind of, but what was the first book, right? Like we're obviously going to talk probably a lot more about the second book today, right? However, I'm going to call it now. We're probably going to hear your name in the next 5 years. It's going to be like a big blockbuster movie, and there'll be 5 movies, and it'll all be about. That'd
be great.
Yeah, 100%. We're putting it out there, so now it has to
gotta
happen,
put it in the universe.
There you go. Absolutely.
So, you know, becoming an author and being able to share that story, obviously you were very young whenever that happened to you, but I feel like that was probably a very defining moment, at least in your younger life, and probably all the way to now, right? With that being said, you know, when you were younger and you had to cope with that, there was no part of you that thought you were going to write a book about it, right?
Yeah.
So
I was not a writer. I was not somebody that journaled. Writing was something I discovered as an adult that I feel like I'm pretty good at it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you've written multiple books, right? So what got you, you know, with the first book being more of like a novel, right? It was, you know, fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what got you to go from that to going, hey, you know what, like, right, we'll call it like a mini memoir, and then I love books, from the way you described yours, it has like a workbook, so you are participating in, you know, the steps and exercises to help you kind of accomplish the same thing that maybe you accomplished, right? Am I
Correct.
saying that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So what got you to go, hey, you know what, I think this is what I need to do, or what I want to do, and then share it with you know, strangers, I mean, the world, right?
So it all started as a project for a business class that I was taking. I did not go to college right out of high school. I had made it into the Ice Capades and had planned that it's all I ever wanted to do is travel with the Ice Capades. It was in 1983, telling you, giving away my age. And 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, they said, congratulations, you're on a waiting list, because back then it was very, very small. So all my friends were going to college, and I thought, well, maybe I should go to college too. I went to a fashion institute for 1 semester, didn't like it, just started working full time. So fast forward 35 years after graduating from high school, I completed my bachelor's degree. So nice. In 2014, it was one of my early business classes. We had to come up with a company, and like, it was a whole project. And I came up with this concept, and that was when I started writing the book. And then I put it aside because I was then heavily into finishing my degree. And once I dropped my son off at college in August of 2019, it was just like, I think that having a teenage son, and from a financial perspective, I've been a single mother for 7 years. We can circle back to that situation, another tragedy. So it was, I think that he was just taking up a lot of space in my head, you know what I mean? Because he's here, and it's just a lot when you have kids. So once he was off at college and settled in, I had the mental capacity and energy to actually sit down and finish it. And I reached a point where I became so disgusted with humanity and the way that people treat each other and the lack of kindness and compassion in this world that I had to get the book out there. I finished it in 2020, January 2020. But before I go into that, because there's something in there that I want to share in the book, I felt like I had to tell my story and the things that I've experienced, because it demonstrates that no matter what your struggles are, you can get back to a place of peace and happiness. And I even say in the introduction that, like, there's a part of me that doesn't even feel worthy to share my story, because there's so many people that have experienced so much more than I have. And at the same time, you know, some people think, my gosh, I can't believe you've gone through all that. But when it's your own and you get through it and you work through it, it doesn't seem nearly as bad as what other people have experienced, you know?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I've personally experienced like a similar close loss, and you have that feeling. It might, I don't know if it's a coping mechanism or something like that, where you're like, people have it worse, or I know like I am not suffering any more than anyone else. But then it kind of got put into perspective when my close friend lost a grandparent, and they were like,
Wow.
they didn't want to talk to me about it. They finally told me, they're like, I felt bad bringing this up to you because of what you had been through. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like you can't compare losses. So
No.
yeah.
And here's the thing, any pain that you experience, pain is pain. And when you're experiencing pain for the very first time, it's real and it's devastating and it hurts. So whether it's a child that a toy gets snatched from them for the very first time, or you're a teenager and your first love breaks up with you, or you have a family member die, if it's the first time you've experienced it, it's the most horrible thing you could ever experience. So pain is pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, I guess, want to chime in and talk about, it's all very relative. And there are people, so like in my brain, the way I kind of imagine it is, there are people who really enjoy eating spicy food, right? And they can sit there and they can eat like the hottest peppers on the planet. And obviously they start sweating, whatever, but they have no reaction to it. They're still feeling pain. It's still a very spicy pepper, but they're just choosing or have the capacity to just sit there, observe it, deal with it, and then they're done. Then you have people like me who I borderline think I'm going to die, because it's like, why did I eat this ghost pepper? I can't handle this. I made mistakes. And I'm very overreactive about it, right? But it kind of painted a picture for me where I had several moments occur where I felt a lot of pain, and it lasted longer than I felt like it needed to. But I, was either struggling to wrap my head around it, or I wasn't confronting that pain or processing it and coping with it. And then you look at people who have stories of tragedy that are very hard to even, like, you can't fathom it, right?
Right.
But it didn't happen to me, right? Like, I don't have to try to fathom that. If it ever does happen, then that's when you find out, And so when you said earlier where you're like, man, you just got really sick and tired of, it just feels like humanity is turned on itself and everyone's just like really mean to each other and stuff. I've been there several times in my life. And I think recently I just finally got to a point where I'm trying again to look at it from like even right now, the three of us talking to each other, like, we're all having a pretty good time. We're being very civil with each other. And like, I don't feel like any of us are being toxic to each other. Moments happen where like there's going to be the good and the bad. Now I'm rambling. I'm going to go down a whole rabbit hole, right? But I just want to say that I think it's crazy because we have similarities of like tragedy, but to each their own. You know what I mean? Like, we experience things from our perspective. And I hope that no one ever tells you or Megan or myself like, well, that's not that bad. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
And
that would be bonkers,
I think it's mainly internal, because I know no one ever said that to you, right? And it's just kind of that thought process. But the book, writing about it, the intention is not, this is the exact thing you're going to go through. It's that, hey, here's the story apply it, take bits and pieces, however you will, of how I got from this hard thing. You may have a different hard thing to where I am now, right? That's kind of the end goal of it.
Exactly. Well, I finished writing this in January of 2020, and I picked up my book, and there's something, if I may, I just want to read it real quickly.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Okay. Do. Hold on. I think I'm sorry for dragging this out here.
No, you're okay.
Here we go. We are at a crossroads in humanity. We can either continue to hate or we can choose to love. To choose love, we have to be happy from within. We have to love ourselves first to make an impact in this world. In my opinion, this is due to the universal energy that connects all of us. If we are all feeling negative, it is going to spread in ways we cannot even comprehend. And this was before COVID.
And it applies so much more now.
But I said in there, like multiple times, I talk about how it's going to spread like a virus. And it was just really weird that I wrote that in August of 2019, and had no idea.
Our listeners are going to read your book and be like, she was a prophet. She knew it was coming. No, guys, no, she did create COVID-19.
No, I have no idea.
Yeah, I do love that perspective though, because at a certain point in my life, I started reading, I guess, self-help books, and then I was just trying to learn through, reading and listening to books. And that was one thing that I eventually came to the conclusion of is I feel like anger is a really easy emotion to feel, but even more so like throw gas into the fire, right? Because the rest of the world loves to watch that kind of stuff, and they love to kind of egg it on and see how far it'll go. And when people talk about inner peace and loving oneself, people want to go back to like, oh, you're a hippie or whatever kind of weird connotation they want to put to it. And when I finally started to have that self-speak that talked about self-love and how important it was, if you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for the people you care about closest to you, right? Because if you can love yourself, you can love other people, right? And the better you get at taking care of yourself, the better you can take care of other people. And I wasn't really buying into it, but I was like, hey, I'm going to give it a shot, see what happens. And it changed my life. I think it changed the people that I care about most too, because there was this shift in my energy. So I just want to second that part of your book. I need to read your book. Do you have it on audiobook by chance? That's a question.
Yes, it is. And I found the most amazing voiceover artist. I was so dead set on doing it myself. And because it needs to be so nice and perfect, and I'm and ahs and, tripping over my words, that I was like, it would take me 1,000 hours to actually record this book. But she did an audition, and she was reading I gave her portions to read because it's self-improvement, and then it's the memoir. So I wanted to hear different styles. I started bawling when she was reading my story in the audition. I mean, I was just and I'm like, this is something I wrote. It's my story. I lived it. And it was like, I started bawling myself. I'm like, you're hired.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's how you know.
That's how you know. Well, that's wonderful. I'll probably listen to it. Because I like to be that guy who, I don't have time to sit down and read a book. But I drive a lot too. And so just pop on an audiobook,
I kind of do. I like to hold books. I like to be able to read it on my phone, and I like to listen to them. So I have a variety of
there you
ways
go.
that I
do the same.
I don't know how y'all do that. My brother does that. Like, he's like, I read some today, or I listened to it. I'm like, I just listen. I just pop in the headphones and go.
At least you're doing it.
This is true. Right. This is true. I have to give myself a little bit of credit.
Well, back to me writing, I think what helped me to become a better writer, two things. I was a legal secretary from the age of 18. And when you're typing up legal documents, it's a whole different style of writing. That helped me, number one. But number two, I read and read and read and read. And when you're well read, it's easier to write. So
for
hint
sure.
out anybody out there, if you want to be a writer, you need to read a lot. really teaches you a lot about writing.
Yeah, and I mean that's how a lot of people also increase their vocabulary, right? Is they have that, like I mean I'm the person that sometimes I can figure it out through the context clues of whatever's going on in the story, but I'm a huge fan of the dictionary. We get along really well, you know.
Yeah.
Good old
But
Google.
yeah, good old Google. I was waiting for my phone to like, what did you need? It happens with Siri too. Like they just pop up and they go, I'm sorry, did you need something?
Yeah.
So whenever, you know, you wrote the book, you had the experience of writing a book before, but obviously this was a different style of book. This probably had a lot of meaning to it. Did you have any, I guess, defining learning experiences in the process of making the book? Or was it like a pretty, like you had it in your head, you're like, you knew what you wanted and you just kind of went for it and it kind of came out?
Yeah, I pretty much did. What I did learn about myself that I didn't realize is that self-doubt creeps up more than I ever imagined possible. You know, being a life coach for over 20 years, and I've been living this way for 30 years of my life, I was like, wow, like I really am doubting myself. This is crazy. And then I say to myself, I'm human and it's normal and it's natural. And if you weren't doubting yourself about putting your life story out there for the world to read, there's probably something wrong with me, right?
Yeah. It's like a little nagging voice. Like it's always just kind of like it's back there and then like you ignore it, but then there's those days where you can't. But I do 100% agree. I'm sure there's people that hear that voice and they're like, nah, and they just like go after it and they're right in there. I don't know. But so there was something I guess I kind of wanted to go back and touch on if you wanted to. You had said, you know, you had been in a previous marriage, but that kind of led down a road and then somehow it ended, right? And you said it was like another tragedy. So I was just kind of curious if you wanted to.
So yeah, that is all 2 chapters of my book. So my ex and I met him when I was 21 years old. There's other things that I hadn't gone into, which I want to throw out there. So because after my brother died, I never dealt with the loss and the grief. In my early 20s, I ended up abusing cocaine and hit rock bottom and then got my life together. And that's what put me on this path. So I had just gotten engaged to my ex-husband and circumstances happened. I admitted that I had been abusing cocaine and I cleaned up my life. We got married. We were married for 9 years. At that time, I was told I would never have children. I had already experienced 2 pregnancies. We agreed to separate. And the day that we agreed to separate, I found out that I was pregnant with my son. It was kind of like my miracle baby. And so I took that as a sign that it wasn't time to end our marriage. So we stayed married for another 10 years. And I ended up having a total of 5 pregnancies and 1 little boy. So that was another part of my story.
Yeah.
That was hard. You know, I was never one that was totally desperate because I had come to terms with the fact that I was never going to have children. But I know that it is a very difficult thing for a lot of women. And so that is my chapter all about trust and just learning how to trust that things work out exactly how it's supposed to. So in October of 2013, 2 weeks after my son's 13th birthday. I remember my brother died 2 weeks before my 13th birthday. My ex-husband was driving drunk and hit a motorcycle and killed 2 people. And I stood there and handed the phone to my son and watched my little boy on his hands and knees, sobbing and punching the ground because he knew what that meant, right? So it was a very it was kind of one of those situations that unless you're in it, it's just weird because it was such a tragedy, right? I mean, 2 people lost their lives, you know, 2 adult children lost their mother and father. What he did was wrong. And then there's my son and I, you know, my son was kind of like this innocent victim in the whole thing, right? Because he lost his father. Now, granted, he could still talk to his father, right? There was always that gratitude that he maintained, that he still was able to talk to his father and whatnot. So his father has been in prison for 7 years. He, as a matter of fact, he gets out in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Wow.
Coming home in 3 weeks. So he's been in prison for, with his house arrest and all of that, it's almost 8 years total.
Wow.
So yeah, so he was a very, very extremely talented lawyer, and pled guilty without a trial, hoping that the judge would be a little bit more lenient. And he had the book thrown at him and was sentenced to 41 years in prison with 32 years suspended. So when he gets out, he will be on probation for the rest of his life, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just, and it's interesting because I was talking to one of my best friends and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, how am I going to raise this little boy? He's a, he just turned 13, and that's such a fragile age for a boy. And because you're not a man and you're not a little kid, you're kind of in between there. And she was like, yeah. She said, Sandee, everything you've done, all your therapy sessions, all your coaching sessions, the hundreds and probably thousands of books I read and seminars I attended and workshops, she's like, everything you've done in your life has led you up to this moment, like to raise a healthy and happy young man. And he's very, very happy. I mean, it could have gone either way, right?
Mm-hmm. He
could have been a rebel. He could have gotten in trouble with the law. He could have, so I'm just very grateful and thankful that, he's okay. He and his father have an amazing relationship, and he's, and my ex and I, we're like brother and sister because he doesn't have any family. He lost his mom and his sister while he was incarcerated, and his father died like the year before the accident happened. And so, he didn't have anybody. So I had to step up and really be there for him and help him do, everything. I even had to help plan his mother's funeral when his mother passed away. So, it's, in the end, there's been a lot of really good that has come out of this tragedy. I think that in the neighborhood that I live in the town that I live in, people were really taking it for granted when it came to drinking and driving. And luckily, Uber was just starting to really make its presence known where I live. So it was, people were just like, if it could happen to him, it could happen to me, right?
Yeah.
And so it really, we'll never know how many lives were saved because of his mistake. But I have to think that it's quite a lot because people would drive drunk all the time.
I think it's interesting because I used to say it kind of on and off, but now I think about it very often of everything happens for a reason and it's happening the way it should. Yep. And this really upsets some people. It used to upset me sometimes when I was younger because bad things happen and then you go, oh, so that was supposed to happen to me. I mean, it's not I never mean it from a place of like these bad things happened in a personal way to people, right? Or to myself. Yeah. But there are some bad things that have happened that have changed the course of my life eventually in a way where I could go, hey, this is what the positive was of that happening. Exactly. And I'll tell you, just from the outside looking in, obviously I'm just hearing the little bit of the story that you shared. But like for him to be able to go like, hey, I effed up. And then he basically owned up to it and then paid the consequence. Like, obviously it wasn't a good example to drink and drive and have that accident happen. However, like dealing with the consequences of it, like that's big. I think especially for a 13-year-old to witness, right? Like that's a good example. And then of course he has the example of you where, you've been through some stuff like, and like, look how you handle it. And where I really started to pay attention to figuring out a different version of myself where there is like self-love and there is finding peace and there is a better understanding of myself was there are people in my life that I want to be an example for if they ever needed it. Right. Like I'm not necessarily here to be like, hey, I'm your example. But if I could be, and I was ever in a place where they needed that example, like I hope I can be that. Right. So I guess I just kind of commend you on that of, that is a bonkers situation that just like you said, That's a lot of us are like, that could never happen to me.
Until
And
it
then
does. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it does. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh
And
man, there's no protocol for that.
and
There
kind of-
isn't.
Yeah. And going back to that, you kind of talked about briefly at the beginning how when it happens, you talk to your friend and it feels surreal. What do I do? Like, I can't do this. That self-doubt kind of creeping back in. And that's kind of part of failure we talk about all the time, that you don't have to necessarily fail to feel it. It can just be the potential of, what if I mess this up? Like thinking about your son and, what if I can't do this? What if I can't give him what I want to give him? And then your
Yeah.
friend's like, no, you've been working for this, like reassuring you, you can do this. And I'm sure it wasn't instantly like 100% I can do it, but a little nudge in that direction, right? Of
Sure.
feeling like I can get
Put
there.
on the cape, right? You put on the
Yeah.
Superman outfit and you're
Yeah.
like, all right, here we go. We're doing this.
So in my book, my son, I wanted him to tell the story. And he wrote his college essay when he was 16. And if I may, I'd like to read the last paragraph of his college essay, because I think it really sums up how this changed his life and his perspective on life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love that.
So he says, my mother always says everything happens for a reason. And I truly believe this, because without the accident, I would have been spoon-fed my whole life. Because of the accident, I am independent and I make smarter choices. Most importantly, I learned that life happens in moments and that you cannot let one moment ruin the rest.
Wow.
That is pretty profound for a 16-year-old.
Yeah. They'd be like,
think-
who wrote this for you? And they're like, no, I wrote this. And they're like, no, who wrote this for
Well,
you?
you know, and he shared it with me. And then when I was writing the book, I asked him, I said, can I put your college essay in there? Because it's so profound, like the whole
Mhm.
thing, like it's his experience of how it happened, because it's my ex-husband. It's not my story to tell, right?
Right.
And, you know, it was just so profound. And I made a couple of little tweaks, even before he sent it with his college applications, you know. So I was really happy that he, you know, gave me permission to use that in the book, because it just speaks volumes to how he, you know, making lemonade out of lemons, or, you know, whatever you want to say, that for such a young man, that he really, he just really gets life. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's a blessing, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because you brought up in your early 20s, like cocaine. And I think one way or the other, most of us come across something that we end up like abusing, right? And so the obvious one is usually alcohol, and then there's like, you know, subtle drugs, and there's like the really hard drugs, but then there's like simple things, right? Like some of us, we abuse like sugar, right? Like we eat sweets or whatever, and we get those endorphins. Or like, you know, we talked about caffeine before the show started, right? Like I am the world's worst. Maybe I'm not the worst, but I definitely
I just wish I could be addicted to exercise. Gosh,
I want that one too. He actually is. He's a personal
Yeah.
trainer, so it's really annoying.
I tell you, I'm like, why is it, you know, and I think it's just because I didn't even mention this yet, but I'm a retired US national and international figure skating coach. And I have my gold medal in ice dancing. And I think because it was such a challenge that anything else is just boring to me. I don't know.
You
Getting
know,
on a
it's
treadmill doesn't sound as exciting.
No.
so when and I don't want to make this about me liking the gym, though I will talk about that
You
for the
normally
rest
do.
of my life. But my whole thing is people will ask me, right? Because they're like, hey man, like I don't need to be Superman, right? I'm not preparing for a movie, but I need to lose weight, or I want to be a little stronger, or, you know, the most important thing that I talk about is like feeling better, right? And so people will be like, dude, how are you working out all the time? And it's literally, I'm chasing endorphins, because I mean, I've had people, you know, maybe they don't feel this way, but I think it's kind of like, it's one of those beautiful moments that if you can get on the phone with me, or like we can go out to breakfast after I get done with the gym, I am high, like literally on life, because my brain is just pumping endorphins through my body. Everything feels great. And you're right, like that is, I mean, we're joking about it, but like that is the thing that we would want to be addicted to, right? Is like the natural whatever. But like, of course, I'm slamming energy drinks and I'm like, oh, it only has 78 milligrams of caffeine. Like, we need to find the one with 250. Like, it's a drug. But so all of that going back to, it's interesting because a lot of, movies, TV, entertainment in general, a lot of the way they talk about coping mechanism is through drugs, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because we're very susceptible when we're younger, right? Like when I look at how I viewed movies when I was like 15, 16 versus how I look at it in my 30s, it's kind of laughable, right? Like I was just a stupid kid. I wasn't writing profound college essays and stuff. I was too busy being like, man, that's really cool. And usually for all the wrong reasons, and so I do think there's a point of, having the right examples in life. And then for whatever reason, he was very receptive to it. Like, of course he was going to end up being okay. Right. And, we're all here to make our own mistakes. And, whenever that time comes, right.
Yeah.
But that's got to be wild. I'm sure he also didn't know that he was going to be on a podcast, like being talked about. Can't even defend himself. He's like, I am not profound, right? Yeah,
he doesn't even listen to my podcast. He's like, oh yeah. I'm like, he hasn't read my book.
Someday he will, and then he'll be like,
I visited him at college, and it's sitting on his nightstand. I'm like, well, it makes a good, coaster for your drinks. So that's great.
There's just rings all over it. You're like, well, I guess it's a special edition now. But also, like, I mean, I also have to imagine too that, one being 19, like, you're busy, you're still like a kid doing stuff. But the other thing too is, I mean, he knows the story, right?
Oh yeah, he knows my whole life story. Like he knows.
Yeah, so he's like, I don't need to read the book. I've lived it. Like I've been there.
And I told him, trust me. I mean, I used to tell him, warn him about cocaine. I'm like, do not. It's going to be put in front of you at some point in college, most likely. Please, I begged him, and then I tell all of his friends. I'm like the poster child. Oh my gosh, my husband and I were in line going to see Maroon 5. It was a Christmas present for Christmas of 2019, and I had to wait an extra year. He got me front row center stage. I was like a 13-year-old little girl, we're sitting there. I look over, and this 2 girls are there. I look over, and she's snorting cocaine, and I roll to my window. I'm like, excuse me. And I go, don't do that. I'm like, don't. What
at a Maroon
doing?
5 concert. Like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I only do it now and then. And I looked at her and I said, you may not know this, but I am your guardian angel. I said, don't ever do it again. I'm telling you, it's going to ruin your life. Please don't do it again.
Here's the crazy
My
part.
husband's like sitting there going, oh my God. And I'm like, I'm not going to let this.
And you have to say something.
Girl,
yeah.
he's sitting there snorting cocaine. I'm like, no, I'm going to say something.
So I've never done cocaine, and I apologize for
you never should,
here.
Sam.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
glad you haven't.
Well, so my point is that you see this person snort cocaine, and then you go, I'm your guardian angel, you should never do this. And then they're high as a kite going like, oh my God, I just witnessed a guardian angel. And like, I cannot imagine the rest of that night. Like everyone else is jamming out to Maroon 5, and they're just standing there having like the most existential
crisis. I need to rethink this. Yeah. But at least you said something. Because you're
like, how do you get cocaine out? Like you just keep trying to. Well, and there's a lot of people too who have probably been down that road, whichever way they went down that road, right? And they probably don't have the confidence or the desire to be like, yo, dude, I have to tell people this because, whatever nightmare you went through, and I think it's interesting too, because it's all kind of perspective, right? Of there are people who become desensitized one way or the other, right? They've lost a lot of people in their life, or bad things just kept happening to them, and they eventually were like, I don't care. Like that's the way they coped with it. And then there's people that they caffeine, cocaine, alcohol, whatever it is, but to them it never is a big deal, right? Because I think maybe the key word is rock bottom, like hitting that point where you don't have a choice. You know what I mean? Where
a lot of people view it as like you are a failure, the lowest of the low. You've hit it all out. There's no return. But when I experienced my loss as well, there's no right way to cope. No, there's no instruction manual. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, if they don't know where to go, they will go to something like that. Mine was more of drinking, but you don't really know what's happening until it's kind of too late. And then you think you're a failure, but you're really not. You did mess up a little bit.
Yeah.
You can recover from that. And both of us are examples of there's a way out, there's a way forward, but some people just need to be shown it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I
that
was, yeah, I was just going to add real quickly. I was very lucky that my bottom was not very low. Like it was
Oh.
my rock bottom, but nothing horrible. Thank God. I was very, very lucky because it could have gone bad, so bad in so many different
Sure.
ways. And I was just very, very lucky that my low point was not that low. So,
and I think that's another relative point too of
yeah.
I think I have a moment in my life where I was like, man, I'm in rock bottom, and I hung out there for a little while, and I guess there was shame, and then there's that feeling of I failed, and in some regard I failed maybe a standard that I had for myself, but eventually getting to a point where you start crawling your way out or whatever it is, you start that exploration of like, okay, well, how do I get back to inner peace and happiness? It's not an overnight thing, and that's the part that sucks, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that in my story, I would label it as like I did fail, and I dwelled in it for a long time because I think I felt like shame and was like, hey, I don't want to talk about how I failed, so I don't want to ask for help, and I don't want to blah 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 blah. Where the reality was, the only way I could even start succeeding is I had to just acknowledge what it was, like the elephant in the room of, all right, I got to this point because I effed up. Like, here we are, right?
I guess that triggered a question for me. So when you started deciding I want to be a life coach, what kind of drove you into that? And then how did you, when you got into it, approach failure with clients or people you were talking to?
So I got into it simply because I retired from coaching skating, and I started doing these workshops, and I just really enjoyed that. And then I learned about life coaching. I was like, never heard of it before. So I just took a course and I got certified to be a life coach. And it just seemed like the next right thing to do in my life. My son was very young at that time, and I had owned an IT recruiting company. Because of the IT market went belly up in 2001, I ended up closing that in January of 2003. So my son had just turned, he was like not even 2.5 years old yet. So I decided to stay home, but I needed something to do because I was not a great stay-at-home mom. Like, I'm not the crafty kind of person, and I wasn't, yeah. So I needed something to do. So that was what drove me into it. Now, how I teach failure and work with clients on failure is no different than when you're working with an athlete, because you need to fail in order to succeed. And I love the baseball analogy, right? How many times does a hitter strike out before he gets a hit? And, let alone a home run or anything like that. And, failure is the path to success, and there's no other way around it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, it's all about shifting your perspective. So what I do, I like to work with people on perspective and not focus so much on failure per se in that word, but let's talk about perception and how you can shift your perception. Because, our perception, your perspective comes your perception. Your perception then becomes your beliefs. Your beliefs then become your reality. Mm-hmm. And if you shift that perception, you're going to shift your reality in the end.
Yeah, I always, I guess, joke in my head, because sometimes I have to make myself say things to myself that are sometimes kind of sappy or really positive, and I'm like, just fake it till you make it. Like, fake it until you believe it, because I agree that your belief system does decide your reality. And that's going to be kind of difficult. Like, I'm sure you have to work with people sometimes way longer than others, right? To help them it kind of take hold of that.
Yeah, it depends on the stories that they're making. I call it making up a story. So it depends on the stories that they're making up or the limiting beliefs that they have about themselves. Mm-hmm. And not everyone is able to shift that perception or the
Right.
perspective. And
It's not easy.
I call it like blinders. You know how horses have the blinders on?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So many people go through life like this with the blinders on, and it's like tunnel vision, and they, you know, it's black and white, and there's lots of shades of gray.
This is true. Sometimes it's horrifying, just FYI. You take off the blinders and you go, whoa, oops, and put on.
Well, yeah, every once in a while you can put them on just to like.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm gonna have a day with blinders, right? No, that's good. I like that. So really quick, I do want to kind of give you a moment. This is what I like to do towards the end of the podcast, right? Where I would like you to either share like some advice that you think would help, you know, the listeners at home or wherever they're listening. They're probably in their car, right? Or not, if not life advice, like maybe even something to like ponder, right? Because it seems like you know, you have a very high spirit, even through all the things that you've gone through. And I think you've experienced a lot of different pieces of life, right? And I mean, like ice skating coach to life coach to then you're, you know, writing books, and I mean, probably saving the world. Like that's where the Superman joke comes from, right? Because at night you're like a hero.
Wonder Woman.
There you
There
go.
it is.
So thank you for that. I received that, and thank you for saying that. I tend to be this incredibly overconfident person.
Good.
Not a bad thing.
Like when I took up tennis a few years ago, and I've been injured for 3 years, I took up tennis, and in my mind, I'm like, I'm 52 years old, but I'm going to Wimbledon next year. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, that's where my mind goes. Now, obviously, you know, but so I'm just not afraid to try. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid to try new things. And I'm a risk taker. So that's kind of where all that comes in. So I'll share some advice, and I love this. And I used it in a group coaching scenario on Thursday. And it was pretty exciting because I hadn't used it before. I started working with a group of 23 teenage mothers that live at a skills center in Kenya. And it is the absolute honor of my life to be able to work with these girls, because many of them have been, you know, molested, and they're learning skills so that they can actually get a job and, you know, be self-supportive or whatever.
Yeah.
So I use this for the first time in a group, and it's not my idea. It's Mel Robbins. She has a new book out, and this is
Love
in her new book. And I think this is the best advice that I share to everybody. And I always give her credit for it because it's not mine. And that is, never leave the bathroom without giving the human that you're looking at a high five.
Mm.
And it's very, very powerful. So what I did with the girls was I was like, you know, turn to the person to you know, your right and your left. And I want everybody to give each other a high five. And it was so, the faces were lit up, right? They're giving everybody high fives and high fives and high fives. And everybody's laughing. I was like, how did that feel? They're like, amazing. I'm like, right? Doesn't it feel amazing when you give somebody a high five? Well, why don't we do that for ourselves? Right?
Yeah.
I love giving high fives, and never once in my life have I went, I should give myself a high five.
Exactly.
Now the bad part is I'm going to take this literally. I'm going to be in the bathroom. I'm going to high five the glass. It's going to shatter everywhere. It's going to be a whole ordeal.
There's gonna be
I
I'm
hands
gonna feel
lightly
good.
touch it.
Yeah.
Just lightly touch, because you want your handprints on the
Yeah.
mirror. But
Oh,
it's like,
touche.
look at yourself in the mirror and say, how can I support you today? And give yourself a smile and high five.
That's a good one.
I think it's a
Isn't
good
that
one.
great? I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I
it
love
kind
that.
of forces people to take that time for themselves when they normally
Yeah.
don't.
And
Yeah.
it feels good. And if it doesn't feel good, keep doing it until it feels good, because it's going to feel good. You just got to keep doing it.
You know, that's something that just popped into my head is I can probably picture several movies where the person's like confronting themselves in the mirror, but it's never a good experience. Like we need more movies and TV shows where they're confronting themselves in the mirror and it's like a high five scene. You know what I mean? We're going to make that happen. Whenever your book becomes a movie, you need to write in
Just
a
tie
high
that in
five.
there. Yeah.
Bam.
I will put that in the next chapter. Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I really do appreciate you sharing that, because I think that was spot on. I think that was great. And even if we get one person to do that outside of the three of us, obviously, I think we've changed the world, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I do want to say before Megan talks about the good old socials, thank you again for coming out and sharing your story with us, having this conversation. It was a good time. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here. So thank you, Sam and Megan, both.
Yeah, 100%. And then Megan, you know, the part you love,
it is
those
that
social
time.
medias.
You know how obsessed I am with social media.
Also,
this is
are
a
we
running
gonna,
joke that I don't really get on it.
Are we able to still say 2008 Facebook, or do I have to say 2008 late Facebook, because now it's not Facebook anymore?
Now you have to say 2008 Meta.
Oh man,
that's the new Facebook.
When did that change? Is it literally changing to Meta?
Well,
yes and no.
Technically, yeah, but like the general public, in my opinion, is gonna be like, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, Mark, but you know what I'm gonna call it? Facebook. All right, 2008.
I don't think anyone's gonna change it for quite some time, but the overall company is Meta that owns Facebook. Okay. So we'll see how that goes.
It's not important, but I think there's a lot of crazy things going on in the background that maybe we don't know about. And I don't know, when you take like a name like Facebook and you're just like, all right, overnight we're changing it to Meta because of this, like, you're hiding something. I don't even want to. But hey, you can check us out on Facebook. No.
You can check us out on the metaverse.
There it is.
But all of our socials, you can find us at Friends of Failure. We also have a YouTube channel if you're listening to audio and you want to see our lovely faces. And one of our favorite parts, you can send in your own failure, positive, negative, funny, sad, whatever you want it to be. And you can make it anonymous if you want to, just to vent something out, get it off your chest. And you can email that to friendsoffailurepodcast@gmail.com. And you can also send in a little voice message to 916-304-3345.
Yeah. I do want to say that I think the social media aspect is something that it's going to change one day for us, and it's going to explode, and then our outro is going to change dramatically, and I think it's all going to start with this metaverse thing. I don't know. I just we'll see.
We'll buy into that.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm just putting that there so that, you know, when we have 5,000 episodes, people can go back and he knew all along. I'm going to be, you know, well, awesome. I want to thank everyone for listening today. And of course, I want to leave you on one last note, which is, don't forget, life is happening for you, not to you. So go out there and fail.
If it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. This is the secret. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.